Startup.ph is co-produced by Sprout Solutions. Check out our partners in the description. Startup Mindsets, a blueprint to thrive in an innovation-driven and globally connected world. A book to be published November 2024. Startup.ph is happy to interview its co-authors, Earl Valencia and Dan Gonzales, two seasoned veterans in the startup space. Hello, Earl and Dan. Kamusta?
Kamusta? Hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here to talk about our new book, Startup Mindsets, which is really a work of heart between, me and Dan and, how much we thought about it. We worked it for a couple of years and I'm glad that it's coming out and hopefully it will help a lot of current and also future entrepreneurs, especially from the Philippines. And Dan, right?
Yeah. Honored to be on the show, Johnny. And I'm excited to tell you about the book and learn some things along the way.
So yeah, Earl and Dan are actually both Filipinos, residing in the United States, I think, right?
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I'm currently in Seattle. I go back and forth, to the Philippines. As you probably see here, I'm actually part of the Innovation Council of the Philippines. So I go back to help and kind of be in the council in the country. So I'm there maybe 3 or 4 times a year.
I
I'm
see.
based now in Seattle. So I just moved here a couple of weeks ago. And Dan's also in the West Coast, right?
Yeah, I don't think for that much longer though, man. I'm looking at me moving out of here, but yeah, born and raised in San Francisco, and that's where I am at the moment, sort of.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for being interested to guest in the podcast, and I'm actually very excited for you to tell us more about this upcoming book that I think will really help startup founders, especially Filipino startup founders. So let's start by me asking this. What really is the book Startup Mindsets all about? Ano nga ba itong book na ito?
Yeah. No, that's true. Go ahead, Dan. Yeah. What's the book all about? And then I can also add, right?
Oh man, it's hard to say, but it's about entrepreneurship and really just following, like your intuition to monetizing your ideas, right? I think a lot of the time we'll see entrepreneurship in like a catchy 10-second clip, but it's really just everything else that's not shown in highlight reels, and it's just about like how do people overcome challenges, and whether that's creating a product or whether that's figuring out how to do something. It really just encompasses self-help and also business and entrepreneurship on a couple levels. But yeah, I think it's got a little bit of backstory and like personal stories that Earl's experienced, and then myself, and it's a good read. I hope you guys check it out.
Yeah. And I think, this really started actually right before the pandemic when Dan and I met in San Francisco. And we were brainstorming of like, why is it that most people don't start companies, right? And what is the secret, let's say, of a place like Silicon Valley, and why isn't it places like Davao, where my family's from, right? Or places like even like Singapore, right? And I think we kind of gravitated towards this idea of like, I think it's really the mindsets of a founder or a venture-backed founder is really the secret of what it is. So we really tried to write the book to kind of capture what is those secrets of, Silicon Valley style founders. It doesn't mean they're just in Silicon Valley, and maybe democratize a little bit of the ideas, but also being very truthful on how difficult it is to make that decision to start a company, right? Like, there's always this saying, how many people can think of, I'm going to go start a company, but I know the odds of success is like 1%. That's not a normal way to think, right? But for some odd reason, founders, that is normal, right? I mean, entrepreneurs are normal. And the people who think this way are the ones who actually make change. And not necessarily being like billionaires, but at least making change in society. So I think we just want to capture what that is. And hopefully we'll help the people at that like -1 to 0 and 0 to 1 stage of that starting that company, because it's very outside, right?
Yeah, but that's actually a good like thesis, right? So really trying to know what makes a startup founder different, what makes him or her a startup founder that will really start like a startup, right? So yeah, because that's really a good question. Like in the Philippines, in Manila, or even outside of Manila, I mean, how can we increase the number of startup founders in order to increase like the innovations,
Yeah.
businesses in the country, right? So, but anyway, I also like to ask because somehow there are other startup books out there, right? So, what makes this book different from other like quote unquote startup books?
Uh, yeah, I have my opinion here. So maybe Dan, I'll start with my opinion and then so next. Oh, this is really a fusion of some of the ideas that Dan and I have. We obviously we have a common experience in San Francisco, right? But I think we were looking for, so when I was a founder and Dan was also in investing, we were asking this question: is like, what are the books about, right? Like, if you like all these startup books, there's two commonalities that we tried to like see if there's any, right? Like, most of it are written by people from the West, right? So I
Yeah, that's
haven't
true.
seen any book, let's say, I mean, I'd love to see, let's say, if Dado Banata wrote a book, right?
Mm.
Someone from Southeast Asia that is in the US wrote a book. For some reason, there's just not many of them, right? So even if I want to say, I want to be like Elon Musk, but Elon Musk's experience is not the same as,
Yeah,
as
agree.
my grandfather's experience, right? I mean, it's very different. So we're trying to look for that. So maybe that's regardless of whatever, right? But another thing is a lot of the book, especially business books, is about the how, right? Like, how do you start a company?
Mm.
What are the things you need to do? How do you achieve product market fit? But then Dan and I really resonated with this, like, why, right? Like, why should an entrepreneur start a company? Why did you start a company? And ultimately, you'll actually, when you ask that question, you get deeper into a founder, right? Because as a VC, you just actually don't, a lot of time, you don't care about the why of the entrepreneur. You just want to say, is the market good? You have
Mm.
some product, founder market fit, you have the background, but we really tried to go deep into like asking, and Dan and I started the podcast, 100 plus, founders specifically that we tried to interview and get some thesis and ask the same question over and over again. And we realized that there's just not many books that kind of go deep and ask that question, like, why did you start a company? What, is there something from the past that's there? And what are really these practical things that you need to think about as you go towards that journey, right? And we're just trying to like find that, and we thought that this would be perfect, especially for places like the Philippines, because we still need more people to go from 0 to 1 in the Philippines, and other emerging markets. So hopefully this book will inspire more people to make that leap, right?
Mm. How about you, Dan? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, what was it? So the question was what inspired the book, right? If
Like
I'm
what makes the book different from other startup books?
Oh, gotcha. I read a lot, so I
Yeah,
think
Dan is definitely an avid reader, so that's great.
yeah, I got a degree somewhere in the back, but I'd say the book, what sets it apart from other books that I've encountered. I think it's really personal. Like it gets into like the difficult challenges that people have, like um, for example, like somebody who decides to do something like drastic to keep the company going, and like these startups, they're different from other businesses in the sense that they have a lot of costs, like server cost, or they'll be really capital intensive, and they'll be bleeding money, right? So like that's a real stressful situation for anyone. And yeah, we just try to really show instances of people who are going through those things rather than trying to be more educate or just more shoving information. We try to show like real life scenarios, and yeah, I mean there's quite a bit of that, but yeah, we also have like some what's that word, like mental models there, and just core examples of like what really people, how they think about things is what sets often how they think about something is what stops them from acting a lot of the time, right? Like whether that's fear or whether that's just hesitation off of uncertainty of like if this is going to succeed or not. And yeah, we just have a lot of examples of people who think differently on those subjects.
Yeah, and in what I see, it's like less of the how, more of the why, and actually more of the who. Like for example, if you want to be a startup founder, who should you turn yourself into? How should you transform yourself, right? So who can you who can you like maybe copy? How can you change yourself in order to get that startup mindset? And once you have that mindset, that's when you start doing the how to's, right? So I think one word in what I understand, right? So I think one word describes this also. It's like it's more contextualized and it's more relatable because that's right. What Earl said. The context in the West, like in like maybe in the United States or in the Western world, cannot always be adapted to other parts of the world, right? If you want to be a startup founder, the context there does not always apply. So first, you should first have that mindset in order to start something. And once you have started something, that's when you go do that specifics about startup
Yeah.
building, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, for example, one of the areas that we tackled in the book is this notion of like, why should you start a company? Because, I mean, ultimately, like, it doesn't make sense, right? I mean, to be honest with you, right? It doesn't make sense to start a company unless it's really something personal to you, right?
Mm.
So we really asked this kind of really interesting questions, which is maybe even bordering self-growth, right? Of like, what really is your own vision and mission of yourself,
Mm.
right? Like, what is that? Because it's really difficult because as a founder, it's just up and down, right? Like you don't actually know if you're gonna survive even 1 or 2 years as a business, but you bet your life into it, right? So the only way you don't have regret is actually if you do something that matters to you, right? But if it doesn't matter to you, you actually will feel like, oh, I should have just stayed in my job, right? So we really try to like ask those, like, at least make you hopefully think for yourself about these interesting questions, or like as questions of like, before you even start a company and you find the co-founder, like what questions do you have to ask?
Mm.
Questions are not related to business or your background, right? A lot of the questions are like, what is the, like, is there any life event that you're anticipating in the next couple of years that I need to know about?
Ah.
Right? I mean, see, this is crazy,
Mm.
right? Because ultimately some people are like, oh, you know what? Like when you find, let's say, a co-founder, oh, what's your background? Oh, you're like a technology guy and I'm a business guy. Let's go,
Mm.
a problem together. Or you're like an engineer, or like you're like an environmental engineer, and then I'm basically like a finance person. Let's go because we love, let's say, I don't know, energy, right? But now you have to think of like the personal side of startups.
Mm.
Really, really
Yeah.
something.
So it's
I think
also
that's why it's a mindset, right? Because ultimately, like, it's about you and it's about how you embrace
mm,
type of thinking, right?
mm. Yeah, so it's also like a deeper look into why you should really build a startup. And it's also about it also helps you answer some personal questions, some personal
Yeah.
dynamics with between the founders, etc. But yeah, so who should read the book? Who should read the book? Like what stage of founders, what type of people should read the book?
Yeah, yeah. Dan, please answer the question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question, Johnny. I think, like a lot of people who have something that they want to achieve in life, but are struggling to get there should read the book, right? Just, I mean, like for me personally and Earl personally, like these startups are companies and case studies that are, uh, you know, case studies that have beaten the odds, and especially like when the odds are against you, you find that, you can find that, you'll find inspiration in some of the stories that are there, and just I guess like even reading it, like you'll be able to relate to someone, and you'll think like, you didn't have to have like the best hands, like if it's a poker analogy, to be successful. I think just anyone who wants to obtain a new perspective in business too, but we didn't use like big fancy words all the time, so it's not like one of those things that are going to make you like like I think it should read smoothly, especially work with Penguin. So just anyone who's looking to broaden their sense of like the startup scene, and I guess like also looking introspectively into like their career and future aspirations.
Mm. Yeah, I actually like that word, looking introspectively. So somehow maybe this is a book for people who's finding inspiration, who's asking the question why? Why am I really doing this? So maybe this book is for them. So before I ask more questions about the book, I actually want to ask more details about the book, like the structure, how did you write it? Let's go first to your background so that our listeners can get a better understanding of why you wrote the book. So, yeah, can we first know more about your background? I know you're a veteran in the startup scene. like Earl, in the Philippines, I know you have done a lot of things. So yeah, can you first introduce to us so like your backgrounds? So maybe let's start with Earl.
Yeah, of course, right. So for me, like I always knew I was an entrepreneur at heart. So I grew up in Manila most of my life, and so I grew up in Manila. I went to UP for a couple of years, and then I went to the US as an to do aerospace engineering. So I'm an aerospace engineer by background, and then I ended up going to Silicon Valley for business school at Stanford. And I was like, I think one of the few Filipinos who was like a Filipino engineer that ended up going to Stanford Business School. And and I got in actually without taking the GMAT, which is a big exam. And it's interesting because when I was there, I was exposed to ideas that I never got exposed in my entire life. Right? This notion of, fail fast, risk, all these things, think big. Like I don't know why, I just never got exposed to that growing up. So with that kind of in mind, I was able to do a couple of things. I worked in venture capital for a bit, both in the Philippines and also in the US. I was in the internal venture team of Cisco, which is a big tech company. And then I got this interesting opportunity to go back to the Philippines and pitch to basically the CEO of First Pacific, which owns PLDT, Meralco, etc. His initials is MVP. And when I was talking to him, he asked me what they wanted to do, and I said I wanted to do something what I saw in Silicon Valley, which is to hopefully fund ideas and make a startup ecosystem. And lo and behold, my pitch worked, and he gave me money
Mm.
to start what is basically idea space, right, which is the
Oh,
first
that's how it came about.
accelerator in the Philippines, and
That was
then
you, Earl.
yeah, it was me. Yeah. So I pitched that idea and, he gave me money to build it. In exchange, I was also head of innovation for PLDT and Smart, and generally the startup strategy of First Pacific. So I did that for a couple of years. And then before I left, we did a partnership with the Philippine government to build Kubo, which is like another startup incubator in the Philippines, which I think mentors also other startup incubators in the Philippines. So, and then, afterwards, moved to the US, worked mostly in Wall Street, in the tech side of Wall Street at a hedge fund called Bridgewater. I was in Schwab. I was in the merger of Dell and EMC. And then I started a company focused on the Philippines called Plantina. So for 4 years, built out the venture-backed company. And that's really interesting, right? Because I was an investor before and then now as a founder. And then I realized how much harder it is to be a founder. Right? I was telling people it's 1,000 times harder to be a founder than an investor, right? Because you're kind of in this cadence of 12 months of like, you got to meet your metrics, else no one's going to fund you. And once you miss the funding, then you basically lose momentum. And, so I have a lot more like practical thoughts on like being a founder or not. Yeah. So, and then now I'm kind of, after we sold the operating business of Plantina, then I'm back in big tech, kind of, learning again in the headquarters here in Seattle of Microsoft in the, cloud and AI space. So kind of doing that, but again, a big passion of mine is the Philippines and innovation. So last year I got appointed by the president to be in the Innovation Council of the Philippines. So
Mm.
a great way for me, and there's so much interesting momentum and excitement. I think that will do, at least formally with the government, a lot more programs on innovation. Yeah, there's even like a law that got passed today, which is going to be great, right, for banks to
Oh.
hopefully invest in startups. So crossing my fingers that the BSP that's going to be finalized, right? So
Oh.
yeah, so these are things, at least in my background, but ultimately, I really want more people in emerging markets and especially the Philippines to really like unlock kind of the secrets of Silicon Valley, and hopefully they'll be motivated. The people who want to listen, will hear this, and hopefully they'll be inspired to create something for the world, right? So anyway, that's like my thoughts. But Dan, I mean, you also have a very
Yeah.
colorful background.
Yeah, go ahead, Nan.
Yeah, that's true. Oh man. Yeah, I don't know where to begin. I grew up in San Francisco, the Bay Area. Like my family moved here my mom moved here I think in 1981 maybe, and then my dad came here in like 1989. And so as a first generation American, like, you grew up in a Filipino household and you see people just blue collar working hard, and you want to, make something successful for them, right? Like, I'm sure in the Philippines they always preach like go to school and get good grades and earn a living and give it back to your family, right? So that's kind of like what my upbringing was like, but I guess like when it came to career, I realized I like to write actually, and I guess I have an English degree from UC Riverside back there, and I even hardly got into that school, but so I guess like that's what like when I was in college, my biggest aspirations was to publish a book and write a book. I thought it would be a novel, but the fact that it's a business book, I think I outdid my self. And but Johnny, are you in college or you graduated already, right?
Yeah. Wow. 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 Thank you for asking that. Do I look like I'm a college?
I don't know,
I'm.
bro. We just met 20 minutes ago. I'm trying to figure
No, no,
that
no.
out.
I actually teach in college. I actually
Oh, you
teach
teach in
in
college?
the University of the Philippines. Yeah. So I teach college students.
Oh, that's so cool, man. I okay, so you teach you're around them then. I just wasn't sure. But yeah, but anyway, I went to UC Riverside to graduate, and in 2017 I come back to San Francisco, and just I'm surrounded by the tech industry that was emerging with, like, you think about like Airbnb, Uber, and Google was these are massively growing companies, and just to be around that and to experience like the economic changes where your rent's not affordable anymore, and like going to lunch is more expensive than it used to be. So I was wondering why all that stuff like happened, and I think I eventually figured out that there's a lot of startups coming to the city, and and I was wondering how are these things becoming so successful. One time I was like asked to be a receptionist at Slack, which was a big software company that still is, and I just saw like a whole different like work environment. And from there, I mean, living in that city and economy, you kind of just are asked to work at these places, and it's one of the biggest job markets in the country for a certain amount of time. And I was trying to figure that out, like what got that to become so big, and then like I also at the same time started reading a book. It's actually right here, the Intelligent Investor, which is by Warren Buffett. Oh, not Warren Buffett, but Ben Graham. And learning about that concept just kind of inspired me to like dig deeper into investing. And in 2019, I guess before that I worked at Google for a little bit, but after that I saw like an application to be like an apprentice for a venture capital fund, and I applied, and that's where I met Earl. And it was interesting how I met Earl. Like I was coming out of a pitch meeting, and there was like 5 minutes left, and he was like doing a presentation, and I guess like it's easier to become friends with another Filipino person or something like that, and especially in business too, because you don't really see too many Filipinos in I guess exec positions or just finance, right? So I connected with Earl there, and I think his last slide was actually he's trying to write this book, and I just said, I have an English degree, let me help you write this book, and then we're here now. But it's cool. So yeah, I mean that's about me in a nutshell. I yeah, I've been running the podcast too. I've been running the Starter Mindsets podcast for a while, and it transitioned into becoming a corporation not too long ago. So looking to make money on the podcast world. I'm sure you know a thing or two about that.
I have a quick question. So you're writing a book about startup mindset. So can I ask about your mindset? Like, what really is the why? What is the why for you? Like, why you're in the startup world? Why are you dealing with startups? So what really is the why for you in this whole career journey?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of me like just having that as like a dream, like to write a book. Really, I don't know why people have. I mean, I guess you could say everyone has a different reason for why they dream to do something, but I don't know why I had to. I just like sounded cool, and then also it's maybe it's a bit of having read a lot of books in my life and just seeing like, oh, I wanted to aspire to be like that, or impact somebody's life through the content or the book specifically that create, and see if it could like affect anyone in a positive way. But yeah, also just as like I was working in the venture world, like just seeing people creating companies and asking for money, you see like this sense of energy and a radical like perspective that's really invigorating, and you want to figure out like why people have that kind of attitude in what they're doing. And if you're around startups a lot, you'll see, oh, you don't want to call them you'd see a lot of irrational people, and when you're around them too much, like you kind of adopt their traits, and you try to pick up something too that's in your own wheelhouse of extreme, not extremism, but more like just highly aspirational, I think, and I think that's what the book was really. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to put my talents to work. Like I think like I'm a good writer, and I think the biggest thing I could do personally was to write a book, and as also as a podcaster too. Like you interview a lot of these folks, and you kind of, I wouldn't say become like them, but you start thinking like them. So
Yeah,
How about Earl?
yeah. I mean, for me, there's a couple of things, right? And maybe it comes from a story. So there's a couple of times. So I went to undergrad in the US, and I went to grad school, and there was one classmate that I had, and she asked me like a really interesting question when I was like 24. And she told me like, Earl, why is it that, you're probably one of the first few, and don't take it wrong, he said, you're one of the first few successful Filipinos I met in my life. Because for some odd reason, I don't think there is a culture of success in your country. Right. And I was like, wow, like, obviously, at some point, I'm like, wow, what kind of question is that? I mean, I felt really mad. But then after like 1 second, I realized, is it true? Of course, I mean, maybe it's not true, but then ultimately it's a perception of someone that's not from the Philippines. Right. So the question that I kept on asking myself is, how can we as the Philippines, as a country, as a race, maybe control our destiny in the world? And I realized when I went to Silicon Valley is so much value is created through innovation. So much value is created through technology. And then I can continue to ask myself, it's like, what is my dream? And my dream is maybe in the future, when my kids turn to my age, maybe the Philippines will be as prosperous than like the US, right? Or even Korea or Japan, right? Like that's something that at least I really feel deeply about, because I don't want my kids to have that same conversation in my life, right? I want basically my kids to say, yeah, you know what? I come from the Philippines, and people are like, oh, that's such a cool country, right? That's a country that is building interesting things that actually I use every day, right? I mean, imagine that the Koreans, I mean, maybe now Samsung isn't as cool, right? But then ultimately you can say, wow, Samsung, your phone that you have now comes from my country. Like that's kind of cool, right? Or let's say an app, and someone builds an app and say, oh, that app that you use today comes from the Philippines. Like that's cool, right? So I just had this like kind of dream, and that came even from before. So my grandfather was from UP, and then he became an entrepreneur, and then ultimately he became the minister of, I guess, telecommunications and communications and transportation. So like the kind of DICT plus DOTC combined during a long time ago, pre-Marcos in the Macapagal era. So then I also realized is that, entrepreneurship and public service is also quite interrelated, right? So once you have success, you don't also want to make sure you give. So I just have like this things in my mind, but really purely it's that I think, hopefully kind of in my lifetime, right? Like this vision that I have for my kids will happen, right? That these conversations should not happen anymore. And there is this sense that maybe we become like an innovation economy someday. It's kind of like a
Yeah.
crazy idea, but maybe it could be, right? So that's kind of what's kind of deep within me. And I think that hopefully I can make a difference before, for next couple of decades, right? That's like my hope.
Is payroll processing taking too much of your time? Introducing Sprout Payroll Starter. For as low as 5,000 pesos per month, you get a team of experts to help you with your payroll and HR needs. We'll help compute and process payroll, handle all your government compliance requirements, and automate timekeeping. Leave the payroll to us so you can focus on growing your business. Enjoy peace of mind with Sprout Payroll Starter.
Yeah, I have many things to also I want to respond to that. Like first of all, I really like the term innovation economy. I also believe that's why we have Startup Podcast PH, because I also believe that the Philippines should be more innovational, like to build a more innovation economy. But just to answer, I'm also thinking like, what if I was in your place when I got asked, maybe when I get asked that question, why is there less of a culture of success in the Philippines? I think my answer will be maybe in the Philippines we define success a different way. I mean,
Oh no, for
somehow,
sure,
somehow,
for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And now it got me thinking. Speaking about mindsets, what do you have to say? Because, for example, the US is like first world, quote unquote, developed, quote unquote, country. The Philippines is a not so rich country, like a third world or a developing country or an emerging market. Is there a difference, like, for people to gain that startup mindset if in the first place you have, let's say, a richer socioeconomic background compared to maybe a Filipino who doesn't have like a richer economic background? What do you have to say about that? I mean, can I just ask your opinions on that? Since we're talking about like the difference between startup people maybe in
Ah,
developed countries and in developing countries.
so Dan, any thoughts there?
Yeah, you made some really excellent points, Johnny. I think that that it's an interesting thing that I've also noticed that from being I wouldn't say a businessman, but like just being somebody who learns from a lot of people in different countries, that perhaps there is a little bit of a different kind of like outlook towards wealth and money, for sure. I think that Filipinos, at least in my experience, they really humble, and like, they don't judge you for I mean, this is my experience, but you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like they really just they're happy people, right? And like that's kind of like the sense, like, they don't have for example, I was in Cebu like last year, and like, people, they're just happy that they have their family, or they have their a roof over their head, like, as I say often. And I guess like as an American, like this is a very capitalistic world, and you see the need to make money because it's, like, glorified here. Like, it's like people are always talking about like the raise, or like their I guess like their new thing that they bought. So it's like, but in the Philippines, it's really just rooted in like good I mean, it's rooted in like, what's that word? Like authenticity, I guess, or just like maybe like a more how do you say that? Like, I think people really care about the community more over there. I think here it's you'll even hear other people, like, I mean, that's a, I wouldn't say weird, but like it's like a, well, maybe it's a negative view on society here, but I think like to answer your question, I think that the culture, it's like a cultural thing. Like perhaps like people here, like they have this big desire to prove themselves, or make it, even though making it here is completely different from making it in the Philippines, which is
Yeah.
also successful in its own right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
What?
I think
How about you, Earl?
I go back and forth like all the time, and I actually I try to answer this question also. I ask myself this question of what is the different, like, what is a startup mindset in the Philippines, and what is a startup mindset in the US. And I think ultimately the one thing that's why I'm hopeful about, infusing, let's say, a startup mindset in the Philippines, because I think Filipinos in general, we care about our community, and we care about the world, right? And society, right? And I think that's really the way that we have to like think about it, right? Where I think the US has a very individualistic society, right? So ultimately it's, society dictates your success, to be honest, purely on money, right? A lot of times. But we're trying to like ask this other question in the book, in Startup Mindsets, of like, no, do you measure yourself on money, or do you measure yourself on impact? Right? I think that's a type of thinking that I think Filipinos, we can define or redefine what success is. Is kind of what you mentioned, right? Like, and we should, right? And why? So I have an interesting thesis, right? Which is, if you do some good innovation for 1 billion people, you'll end up becoming a billionaire, right? So instead of chasing the $1 billion first, you chase first the billion lives impacted first, right? So I think that's a type of thinking that we have to like think about in the Philippines, because we have that in the Philippines called the malasakit, right? Like, we have the empathy, the heart to kind of build that, right? The difference though, and maybe this is something that I am trying to decode, and that's why I wanted to write this in this book. We just don't have people we can point to and say they've done it and they're like me. So ultimately, if there's just more people from the Philippines with similar backgrounds that actually move up and build a story, I think we're naturally, it's a Filipino world, but like maabilidad, which is like you're kind of very savvy, right? Or street smart. I think we're naturally street smart. We're naturally, empathetic, which are very good traits of entrepreneurs that I think if you plop them somewhere else, they'll probably do well. But then ultimately, the problem is there's what you call as a knowledge asymmetry, right? Like there's people who come to the US and they just get connected to these more people who know what to do because of other things. So imagine that if we just create that, that flywheel of figuring out, hey, you can do it too. There's other people who've done it before. They'll want to help each other. Then I think we have something here, right? But so I don't think it's a difference on like place. I think we have our unique strengths. The US has the unique strength to like individualism. But I think the advantage that most people in most Western worlds have is that they're just more models that they've seen it before, right? We just don't have it yet. We don't have it yet, right?
Yeah. And
Um,
maybe we should build our own unique model, right? Based on our culture, based on our skills. Yeah,
yeah,
because
yeah,
that's
yeah.
also a question for me. Yeah, that's also a question for me. Like, how do we jumpstart an entrepreneurial and innovation economy in the Philippines? Like, how do we really make it running, right? So, yeah, this is really a big question, and I think this is also what you're trying to answer in the book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, but the thing that again, as I mentioned, right, like it all starts with the person and their mindset to create big change. Like that's really what the book is trying to tease out. The ultimate thing is like, how can we just inspire someone to ask first that question, like, am I ready to make the jump?
Mm,
What is it for? What is it for? Right? And
mm,
what is it for is for something that is so big that I want to solve for the world. Right?
mm,
I think that's a key. And for example, for the Philippines, right? And this is something that I keep on asking in the Innovation Council, right? Like, what is our innovation? That is two things. One is it makes sense for the Philippines because it's a clear need in the Philippines. But then ultimately, it's also at the same time actually a clear need for other countries in the world, right? So, for example, there's a food security issue all around the world, right? Have you thought about like being an epicenter of like food innovation or like
yeah,
agriculture
that would
innovation?
be nice.
I don't know why
Yeah.
we just don't think about it. Like, I mean, because we think of like, oh, what's the Western innovation? Let's build the next Facebook, right? Like,
Mm,
no, but then why can't we say our Facebook is solving the needs of the people in the Philippines, but actually there's the same needs like in a billion other places in the world, right? Or another thing is like, so this is something that like is kind of weird where, in the US, there was just like this crazy typhoon or hurricane that happened in the US last week, you know? So the Philippines gets 20 to 30 super typhoons each year. But for some odd reason, why aren't we the number one experts in climate change
mm,
and hurricane prevention in the world? I just don't know why, right? So I think the key is just how do we focus our energy as a country and innovators to solve the things
mm.
in the world, right? That actually the world needs. It's just that we think it's not sexy enough, but actually it's sexy if you think about the impact you can give in the world, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a very good question, and I think I mean, like if I were to answer that, I think it's still quote unquote colonial mentality. We still import. We still don't have the mindset to export.
Yeah, 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 exactly, right. So, I
Yeah,
think that's why, you know, that's why there's some stories in really the book that we tried to kind of tease out, some of the experiences that I saw when I was in the Philippines, right? And hopefully that's a story that some people can relate to, right?
yeah, yeah. But yeah, so thank you for this wonderful discussion. Anyway, going back to the startup mindset book. So can I just ask like how is it written? I mean, like what's the structure of the book? Is it like
Yeah.
chapter per chapter, different stories? So what's like the structure of the book? What's the organization of the book? And how did you do the research? How did you put the contents of the book? So how did you write basically the book?
Oh man, I want to answer with an answer that I asked someone on the podcast, and he said one word at a time. So we wrote it one word at a time, but to give you a better explanation, I think it's we wanted to really just grab the attention of the readers with like a hook and a personal story. And if you read business books, you'll see like the use cases of products or whatever the theme was. And I think our theme was choosing to be an entrepreneur, to really follow your gut, or your deeper sense of meaning, and combining passion with your skill set. But yeah, I mean, it's just written chapter to chapter. I think there's 14 chapters, and we include some of our personal lives in there, and we did that to relate to the audience. But it was a big mess for a while until our editors and teammates at the Penguin Random House team in Singapore helped us out a lot. So credit to them for all the feedback and help that they've provided. But yeah, it's a cool book in my opinion, and I'm not saying that just because I wrote it, but the fact that like you're able to bring stories from the Philippines and in different regions in the world together, and combine it into like this unique story that is able to, I guess, like have some sense of inspiration for people who want to achieve something big. Because it sounds fun to like start something, right? But like once you're like spending too much on it, or your home life is sacrificed, you kind of question why to continue. And I guess like it just depends, like to go back to Earl's like earlier thoughts, it's just like having an impact, seeing what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, and I guess from a structural perspective, like the first part of the book is really like, how do you define a startup mindset, and what is the startup mindset? One of the chapters actually is like startup mindset versus traditional business mindset, right? So
Chapter 3, I think.
yeah, I think it's chapter 2 or 3, and we want to set that up, right? So you kind of be in that frame of mind of like, yeah, what is that? Am I a traditional business mindset person, which is linear, or am I startup mindset, which is risk but then exponential growth, right? Like questions like that to kind of set you up. And then the next part really is about prompt questions. Each chapter is kind of like a question in your mind, right? Like for example, are you a wannapreneur? Right. So literally, I'm seeing the chapter now. The chapter name is Action Trumps Talk. Don't be a wannapreneur. Right? That's a chapter. That's our chapter headline, right? Because and hopefully with that it makes you think. And then obviously when we have the chapter, we'll have a number of like kind of either personal or anecdotal stories from our interview, right? And then in the end, it's really like, if you're in this mindset, what's the next step? How do you sustain this? How do you think about it? What should you do? Now you're there. And obviously some other like personal stuff on like kind of our dream for why we wrote this book, right? So that's kind of the general thoughts of how we thought about structuring this book, because we want this book to inspire and really create action, right? And that's how we kind of thought about it. But again, it's many people. I never knew that I was gonna write a book in my lifetime, and I'm just glad that Dan and I met, and our publisher took a chance on us, right? So it's really great, right? Because
Yeah.
I think hopefully with this could hopefully my dream is this could be like a handbook for some entrepreneurs from emerging markets like the Philippines to be like, yeah, you know what? I read this and I want to do something with my life, right?
Yeah, so it's like a handbook, right? But it's like a handbook, but it's not so strict. Like it's not do this, do this, do this.
No,
It's
no,
like
no.
more
Of
of a
course, this is definitely
personal.
no, not at all,
Yeah,
right?
it's like
It's
a
up to you.
personal approach as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, right?
And there are stories, anecdotes. So like in a chapter, this is like one specific aspect of your mindset, of a startup mindset, and then you have explanations, and then stories, anecdotes. So it's something like that, right? How long is the book? How many pages? How many words maybe?
And I think it's like 150 pages. I think something like that. 100,
Oh.
100 to 150 pages, something like that.
Mm.
Yeah, it was
Um,
around 48,000 words, I think, but I could be
yeah.
wrong.
Oh.
So I
Or they
Oh.
think
might have changed it since.
when I look at the manuscript now, it's 170 pages. And
Oh.
apparently, so this is something interesting. So I saw some statistics online. I forgot where I saw it, where a lot more books now are around this like 100 50 to 200 page target, because it's ones that you can potentially even read within a couple of hours,
Yeah,
right?
actually.
So
Yeah,
it's
so
not a
it's
novel, it's not big, but it's something that I hope, let's say, you grab it in the bookstore or you buy it in the ebook, and then you can kind of just read either chapter by chapter, just a few, let's say 30 minutes or an hour a day, and then you can go the next day. And then before you know it, you're done,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the one that we want to do for people, so that and then maybe at some point a year from now you can reread it and say, hey, I remember that chapter. Like, what did Earl and Dan ask me again? Right? And you're like, oh, I'll read that again. So I think
Mm.
that's what happened, right?
So it's something that you aim for to resonate to people to who read it. So I'm actually interested. I think I will buy a physical copy. So
I will sign it for you.
before we before we go to that, is it fun writing a book? Is it fun writing this? How was like the creative process? So maybe just a short answer. Is it fun? How was it?
It was fun, you know. I mean, sometimes you write physically, like on a piece of paper, or like sometimes you'll type it out. But it was fun. It was also difficult too, to tell you the truth. It's one
Yeah,
of the
I
most
mean,
hardest things I've done.
so I think the way I think about it is I applied the start. Dan and I kept ourselves motivated,
Oh.
saying we have to apply the startup mindset to writing this book, right? Which is like, ultimately we say, what is the point of this, right? What is the point of, like, if an editor says change this thing, if the editor says this, or even, like, for us, to be honest, we got crickets for like a year or two pitching our book to different publishers. Nobody
Oh
really
yeah,
wants,
Mm.
crickets.
right? There's even publishers that are asking us to pay them to publish our book, which is kind of weird, right? Which is fine. I mean, whatever, that's a business. So we just had to keep on going, because we believe that this book means something for us, that we want the world. When Dan and I said, like, why do we want to write the book? And we just said, like, we want the world to hear our ideas, right? Hopefully our ideas will change. And so, yeah, we just had to, like, apply the same thinking as we wrote this book of, like, yeah, this is something meaningful. Let's do it. And yeah, the creative process is there. So we wrote everything, interviewed people. And then when the formal thing starts, which is editors, figuring out even, like, what the book cover looks like, you know, structural editing, which is like kind of even like every single word now is kind of looked at. And then ultimately with the final kind of approval, now it's more of just like, how do we get the word out there that it exists, right? So
Yeah, so how do we get the book? How can I get the book? So where can Filipinos, or actually not just Filipinos, where can anyone get a hold of the book? So the online copy and the physical copy. So how can our listeners know more and get a hold of the book?
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It's so if you're in Singapore and listening, it'll be out in the 26th of November of this year. It should be in most major bookstores over there, but in January 26th of 2025, it'll be global, and then it'll be in the Philippines and the US, and Amazon is one of the ways, but also, like, if I'm not mistaken, it's called Fully Booked, right? Like, and
Oh,
what's the other one, Earl?
wow.
Fully
Other
Oh.
place?
booked on Jan 26th. So that's a physical copy. But I think on November 26th, the ebook releases worldwide, right? So,
Mm.
but obviously it depends on you. But I think Dan and I will try to be in the Philippines for kind of that time period to also launch the book. So
Oh. Yeah, so I love Fully Booked, and I'll wait for this book in Fully Booked, or actually in other bookstores. But so do you have a website or social media channel, like if our listeners want to get updated on news about, like, on whether it's already launched, so something like that, announcements, news. So how can they get updated? How can they keep updated about the book?
Yeah, sure. Startupmindsets.com/book should be a way, and they could put their email in there if they're comfortable doing that. Or they could just follow me on Instagram at dan.podcast, which is a little bit easier. And also, yeah, listen to Startup Mindsets podcasts on Apple and Spotify too. That'd be a good way to do that. And yeah, I mean, it's been great talking to you, Johnny, and I've learned some things about myself as well. So
yeah. And then for me, people want to follow me in LinkedIn. I'm pretty open. Can I give some, updates there, for kind of my different hats, my government hat and my private sector hat, and also an author hat. but also we have kind of a right now we're trying to like build up a book launch group, right, in Facebook, just like people who are interested on like updates of the book and kind of getting more close to the author. So we have a little bit of kind of a small group there of friends and family, but it's open to everybody for just who's interested to get more details on like when is it going to be and maybe updates from us. So but yeah, excited to do that, and thank you so much for the opportunity being in startup podcast, PH. I know you highlight so many cool stories here, so thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Earl and Dan. So thank you so much for sharing about yourselves, about your stories, about your mindsets, and thank you so much for sharing about the book. I'll let's get the word out, and I hope our listeners, I hope more Filipinos take a hold of this book, because I believe that this book is also kind of unique. It's also it kind of like tells a different perspective on startup. So I think this is very interesting. So once again, thank you, Earl and Dan, and all the best to the launch of the book. Thank you. Salamat.
Ama, thank you.
Thank you very much to our 48 patrons. This episode is super powered by AskLexPH Academy, our official e-learning partner. Get certifications on Lean Six Sigma, project management, data science, and more. 1 CFO, CFO services, bookkeeping and tax, and payroll processing for startups and small businesses. Tuala, privacy-focused digital experience for sharing identity information across Web 2 and Web 3 ecosystems. Wonder Brand, next generation data science-driven brand strategy and design company for emerging markets. Doon, Philippines' first fully insured peer-to-peer car sharing marketplace. And Space Cebu, global co-working space, private office and meeting rooms for startups, digital nomads, and freelancers. Mamiki Super Pet App, the Philippines' first ever one-stop mobile app for pet products and services. MarketMind Local, a digital marketing company focused in helping small and medium businesses. Mata Technologies, Philippines' premier provider of virtual tours and maps for LGUs, real estate, tourism, and private businesses. Hire Business Solutions, provider of the most configurable cloud-based payroll system in the Philippines. Smile, consent-driven digital employment verification service to make smarter decisions faster. DVCode Technologies, IT solutions specializing in software development, blockchain smart contracts, digital wallets, and cybersecurity. Drive Manila, Philippines' largest peer-to-peer car rental community. Ignite Careers, career matching platform for Filipino talents and hiring companies in the outsourcing industry. Looking for buy and sell online with Sigurado sellers. NutriCoach, personalized nutrition and weight loss programs for you. Benjoy's food products, Domo Premium Bacon Ends, Tapa, and Tocino. ROC.ph, our creative marketing partner. Get unlimited digital marketing services monthly. This episode is powered by Contact RFID Business Cards, CodeChum, Kazam, Jur.ph, Big Giant Games, Founders Launchpad, Packetworx, Uplift CodeChum, Pareto Consulting, Agile Data Solutions, Hustle.ph, Board Prep, Zayls, SeriousMD, Pahatid.ph. Please support the podcast through the links in the description.